I'm a little bit softer on him. Now, this other guy is the next guy we're going to talk about is obviously a much talked about prospect, and I haven't talked about him yet, so it's time to do it. It's Chet Holmgren. 20 years of age. Everyone knows the deal on him. 7 foot forward/center. Gonzaga. The number one prospect or number one talked about prospect from this class for years. Whether he's the number one guy on your board now, that's not really the point here. He's probably going to go in that top 3. His numbers are insane, like block rate, rebound rate, good assists, solid steals, good three-point shooting, although I'm not sure he's this good of a three-point shooter where he shot 39% overall. Let's get the elephant or maybe the giraffe neck out of the way now. Is he too skinny for the NBA?
I don't think so. I get that the body is the biggest concern with Chet Holmgren, but not every player at his size with his frame coming in also plays as hard and as aggressively as he does, right? Like even when he gets knocked back or he gets knocked down, he gets right back up and he's ready to hop back into the play and give it his all. Next possession after next possession after next possession. I think that heart and that character really matters. And the other thing too that I don't hear a ton of people talk about when it comes to his body, he may have been the tallest player on the court at previous levels that he's played in, but I don't think he's ever really been the biggest, or he's ever really been the strongest. And I think the fact that he's learned how to play through some of those quote-unquote physical shortcomings, I think will only help him as he keeps going up into higher levels, especially when he gets to the NBA. Because he was one of the most efficient players by the numbers on both ends of the floor in college basketball, so it didn't affect him playing for program at Gonzaga where they didn't just feast off of lower teams in the WCC conference. They played against many top teams, including Duke, throughout the year. And there was never a moment where I thought he was physically overwhelmed during the college year. So I get that he's not going to be able to hang with Joel Embiid's and the Nikola Jokic's of the world. How many of these centers coming in, though, truly can hang with those guys? Right?
How many guys in the NBA can do it? Like, Embiid can't hang with Jokic. Jokic can't hang with Embiid. Like, they can't handle each other. Like, it's not like an easy thing to be able to do. Yeah, Rudy Gobert gets in trouble against these guys. Like, this is not an easy thing to do. And it's not like when you're watching Chet in college that he's going up for a block and someone just puts their hand out and he flies out of the way. Like, he gets in their face and he throws it right back at him. And it's very easy, and I think it is a bit lazy at times. But look at him. Look how skinny he is. Those ankles are going to snap. Like, that's not how ankles work to begin with. And it hasn't had any impact, I don't think, really on his play this year or other years at higher levels, at high school, at AAU, at international tournaments. It's never had an impact. Like, people might think, oh, look how skinny he is, I'm going to go at him. It doesn't work. It doesn't happen. Like, you can't actually go through him and he ends up being a piece of tissue paper that you can push through. It just hasn't happened that way.
Yeah. I would be concerned about the body if he had like an injury history, right? Like, that's where I would be more concerned. But he doesn't have an injury. People talk about him like he has an injury history. He really doesn't. He's been healthy and he's learned how to play through it.
The other thing that I think gets some lazy analysis with Chet is that people look at him and go, well, look, he's 7 foot, he weighs 150 pounds, he doesn't. But like, he's obviously really skinny. Therefore, he must be uncoordinated, and he's going to have no ability to switch onto the perimeter. He's going to just have to stand around like Sean Bradley and block shots at the rim and not be able to do anything else. And that is just completely false, in my opinion. So do you agree with that? Can you dispel that notion that he is only like a paint defender who has no chance against these other guys on the wing? Because, yeah, it's always going to be tough for a 7-footer to guard a 6'1" hyperspeed point guard. But Chet is not the bottom level of those guys that do that.
Yeah, I don't think he want him in a hyper switchable scheme, but at the same time, as Shaq would say, he's not barbecue chicken out there, right? No. When he gets alone with somebody else in the perimeter. I think the IQ and the feel stuff is incredibly special with Chet. He might be the smartest player in this draft class. And that's another thing too, unless you're really going back and digging through a lot of the film. It's not something that's really said a lot about his game either, but his recognition, his timing, his anticipation, his awareness, his discipline, all of those things wrapped up on defense help him to play against some of those smaller guys. If he can figure out what they're doing and where they're going, he can figure out how to get to those spots first to meet those guys versus always being surprised at what the opposing perimeter players do, which is something that big men struggle with, especially at the NBA level, if they aren't really there to meet some guys on the perimeter and switches.
Next thing or last thing with Chet is, I think these are legitimate concerns, is what is his offensive upside? What can he do in a half-court situation? Because, we look at the top three. If we're going to say, Paolo and Jabari and Chet are the top three, like, I feel confident that if Paolo gets the ball, Like, we can run an offense through him and he can generate shots. Jabari, I'm not so sure, and I'm not so sure with Chet how he works in a half-court offense. He can grab and go. He can run transition. He can run the break. But yeah, is he a guy where it just has to be like almost like Porzingis off screens and hitting deep threes? Like, he's not that level of shooter. So where does he fit in a half-court offense?
I think he's going to be better in the pick and roll game than people give him credit for. That's pick and roll, pick and pop. He was a really good cutter in college. You mentioned some of the transition scoring as well. And then I think if you get him around the elbows and you give him some touches, some chances to actually get some of those shots and opportunities in those areas that Paolo did and Jabari did, I think he can excel in some of those areas. I think he's going to show a little bit more movement shooting things that I think people realize that he's capable of. And if anybody has some questions about how his offense might translate or there being more in his bag, go watch the Mike Schmidt's film breakdown that he did with Chet Holmgren. That gives you a great idea of Chet thinks he has more offensive upside to his game. And I do too. I've seen him, we've seen him, I should say, I know Ceiling, some pre-workout stuff, some pre-game. He's taking shots and getting himself in situations, Josh, where he's practicing stuff and some perimeter shots, almost like Kevin Durant. And it's pretty crazy. It's pretty wild to watch. But I think he's more comfortable than given credit for. And I just wonder if he had some of the same touches as those two other guys and some of those same offensive opportunities, instead of being the garbage cleanup guy that he was at times for Gonzaga, I wonder if we'd be having some different opinions shared in the public space on Chet's offense.
I've had him at number one all through this process. I'm almost undoubtedly going to keep him at number one all through this process. Do you have him at number one?
Yep.
Yeah.
I do. There was a point in like mid to late January where I slid Jabari Smith into that number one spot. But other than that, I've had Chet number one all year, and that opinion's only grown stronger for myself.
Well, we are aligned with that one, but let's get